Well, thank you, everybody, and welcome to Home Dialysis 101. Thank you so much for joining us. Today's speakers are Chelsea Mueller with Fresenius Kidney Care and then Antonio Green from NX Stage. So thank you both for being here today. Before we get started, I have just a couple quick housekeeping announcements. First of all, if you do have a question, you can go ahead and enter it in the Q&A section of the module here. When you click that, it'll open up a box on the right-hand side, and you can go ahead and type in your question. If you can submit it anytime throughout the whole presentation. It will just be addressed at the end of the presentation, so just ask for your patience there. Additionally, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on National Kidney Foundation of Wisconsin. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to preventing kidney diseases, improving the health and well-being of individuals and families affected by kidney disease, and increasing the availability of all organs for transplantation. So we do this through a variety of ways: awareness and advocacy efforts, patient and professional education, as well as free community programs. And then next slide, we do have a couple of events coming up. We will have our Spotlight on Life Gala coming up on Thursday, March 20th of 2025. It'll be at the Delafield Hotel this year. We hope that you can join us. For professionals, our Renal Professional Education Conference is taking place next month on November 14th, and that will be in Madison, Wisconsin. And then for patients, we do have a webinar similar to this one, but on diabetes and kidney health next month on November 20th. And then a Living Donors Together of Wisconsin meeting, which is for living donors or anyone interested in living donation. That will be on January 15th of 2025. So with that, I will turn it over to Chelsea.
Thanks, Amanda. All right. Well, like Amanda said, my name is Chelsea Mueller. I do work for Fresenius Kidney Care. I happen to live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I've been working with people on dialysis and nearing dialysis since 2017. I started as a social worker, and then I transitioned into a clinic manager role for a large home hemodialysis program in Milwaukee. And then I became the regional home program manager for the greater Milwaukee area. And currently I am the manager for our kidney care advocate program, which is a fancy way of saying treatment options educator for Wisconsin, Minnesota, and parts of Chicago, Illinois. That is me and my husband and our super mutt, Katie, who we're very proud of. So the information I'm going to share today is generic information. I would encourage you to go back and speak with your doctor about what you learned today in the class. Home dialysis is a shared decision between you, your physician, and your family. So the first type of home dialysis I want to talk about is peritoneal dialysis, also known as PD. You're going to realize very quickly that we love our acronyms. So there are two ways to do the peritoneal dialysis. The first way is continuous cycling peritoneal dialysis, also known as CCPD. This type of dialysis is done 7 days a week, and most people treat 8 to 10 hours overnight. So you can do some of this treatment while you're sleeping, but because there are no blood or needles involved, you can also be up moving. You don't have to be stationary in one position those 8 to 10 hours. The other way to do this type of dialysis is called continuous ambulatory peritoneal dialysis. Sometimes you'll see this as CAPD or APD. This type of dialysis is also done 7 days a week, but there's no machine involved. This one is where you hang your dextrose solution on an IV pole, and gravity will fill that solution into your peritoneum cavity. And then you can walk away for several hours. You can live your best life. You can go out to lunch. You can play with your grandkids, like whatever you want to do during that time. And then after about 3 to 4 hours, you're going to come back. You're going to drain that now dirty solution into a drain bag, and you're going to start the process over again. This is called an exchange. An exchange typically lasts about half an hour. And you'll do this usually about 3 to 4 times a day. So think of it like a breakfast, lunch, dinner, and a snack before bed. For both the continuous cycling peritoneal dialysis and the ambulatory peritoneal dialysis, the training lasts about 2 weeks. We will not send you home until you feel confident and we feel confident that you understood the material and that you feel good and safe that you're going to be able to do this at home. But don't worry, you have great support at home. You have access to an on-call nurse 24/7. So while you are physically possibly doing this dialysis alone at home, you're not truly alone because you always have somebody that you can call and ask questions to, even at 2 a.m. They want you to call. The nurses want you to ask questions. They don't want you to wait till the next morning. Call them right away. Both CAPD and CCPD can be done independently. However, some people do choose to have a care partner, and that's totally okay. I had a 90-year-old patient who started at 82. And when she was 82, she was able to do it independently. But then as she aged, she needed her children to clean up the previous day's supplies. They'd set up the new night's supplies, and she was able to connect safely by herself. But she needed someone to lift those bags. So we can get really creative if you want to do your dialysis at home. A lot of people like this type of dialysis because it's generally painless. Sometimes at the beginning, you might experience some fullness, especially as you're acclimating to the fluid in your belly, but there are no needles or blood involved. And a disclaimer, somebody called us out on it. You have to have a monthly lab draw. So I guess there are technically needles, but for your overall day-to-day treatment, there are no needles. The nice thing about peritoneal dialysis is it's going to preserve whatever residual function you currently have. So it's going to keep you urinating the longest. Of course, we're very grateful for dialysis. We're grateful for the machines, but whatever your body can do on its own is always going to be better than having to utilize the machine. So we want to keep you peeing. Peritoneal dialysis can be done almost anywhere. Home, work, traveling. We have long haul truck drivers who do peritoneal dialysis. We have people who do tent camping who do peritoneal dialysis. As long as you can safely connect, you can do your dialysis wherever you go. If you're on the cycler, you'll take that cycler with you. As you see this gentleman, we have a carrying case that we can let you borrow. The cycler is about 25 pounds, so very manageable for most people to take it with them. And then we're going to ship those supplies to wherever you're going. If you do ambulatory peritoneal dialysis without the cycler, then we can just ship those supplies to where you're going. And if you typically do the cycler, but you don't want to mess with the cycler when you're traveling, you could temporarily do ambulatory peritoneal dialysis. So again, a lot of flexibility. Because you are dialyzing 7 days a week, you often feel better. There is no downtime with peritoneal dialysis because we are taking the toxins out gently and gradually each day. You don't typically have that dialysis hangover that a lot of in-center patients report. And because, again, we're doing this more frequently, you might be able to have fewer restrictions with your diet or fluid intake because we're dialyzing more frequently. So if you were to do peritoneal dialysis, you're going to need a peritoneal dialysis catheter, also referred to as a PDC. This is a simple day surgery. Oftentimes, it'll be about 2 weeks before we can use that PD catheter. Sometimes we can use it more quickly with a smaller fluid insertion, but for the most part, we're going to give it at least 2 weeks to let it heal. The nice thing about the peritoneal dialysis catheter is you can shower with it once the nurse and the doctor give you that green light. This is the only access type for PD. It's a flexible tubing inserted in your abdomen. There are no needles required, and we're going to teach you how to clean and care for this. So now we're going to talk about home hemodialysis, also known as HHD. So for most people, they're going to do 4 to 5 treatments a week. And I'm leery to say 2.5 hours because that is definitely the minimum. We're going to think about those little petite ladies. They might be able to do 2.5 hours, but for most people, they're going to need a little bit more time than that. So just be aware that 2.5 would be the least amount you could do with home hemodialysis. But for most people, they're probably looking at closer to 3.5 hours. This type of dialysis can be done solo with physician approval, or it can be done with a care partner. This type of dialysis can be done overnight as well, but you will have to have a care partner, and the clinic will provide additional safety devices for you to utilize at home while you're sleeping. This type of training is about 4 weeks. Again, we're not going to let you go home before you feel ready and the clinic feels ready. And you're going to have access to an on-call nurse 24/7, just like you would with peritoneal dialysis. So what I like about home hemodialysis is it's pretty flexible as far as scheduling goes. Because we're only doing 4 to 5 days a week, you can pick your days off within reason. We typically ask that you don't pick the same 2 days off in a row, but sometimes that's going to happen. We want to provide that flexibility when possible. I always talk about maybe you typically dialyze on Wednesdays and Thursdays are your off day, but maybe something came up on a Thursday and you want to participate, and so you can switch those days. It's usually not an issue. You can either, when you're traveling, you can either take this machine with you, and that machine is about 75 pounds. We're going to give you a traveling case to use. Or you could say, you know what, I'm going to go in center temporarily while I'm traveling, and that's another option. And we're going to talk about why that's possible in a moment. Home hemodialysis, people often report that they feel better. So most people, when they're doing their dialysis in center, it takes about 8 hours before they feel good again. But when you're doing it at home, you feel better at typically 1 to 1.5 hours. So if you did some quick math, 4 to 5 times a week, maybe 3 to 3.5 hours, you're probably going, well, that's more time than it would be to dialyze in center. Yes, but you make up for it feeling better faster when you do your dialysis at home. And again, because we're doing dialysis more frequently, you might be able to have fewer restrictions with your diet and enjoy those foods that you love. So as I mentioned, why is it possible that you could go in center while you're traveling? Because you're going to have the same type of access. So there are 3 types of accesses that we can use for either in-center hemodialysis or home hemodialysis. The first one is the arteriovenous fistula, also known as the AVF. This is a simple day surgery. The surgeon will connect your artery and your vein together and kind of make it beefy, because we're going to be cannulating or sticking it with 2 needles multiple times a week. So we need to get those artery and vein a little bit thicker so that we can utilize them multiple times a week. This fistula typically can be used within 6 to 8 weeks. You'll often hear this referred to as maturation, just a fancy word for saying we're ready to use it. The surgeon's going to utilize existing blood vessels. This is the most natural because there's nothing artificial in your body. And then this fistula creates the most optimal blood flow and has the lowest chance of infection. So as you might have heard me hint at, typically a fistula is our first choice, but not everybody's going to be a candidate for a fistula, and that's okay. So then the surgeon might recommend a graft, also known as an AVG. This is also another simple day surgery. The nice thing about the graft is typically we can use it quicker than we can the fistula. This is where the surgeon says your vein and your artery aren't that great. They're a little bit weaker than we'd like to see. So they're going to insert a synthetic piece of material to artificially connect your vein and artery. This one has a lower chance of infection than a chest catheter. So the central venous catheter, also known as a CVC, is our least desirable option because, as you might notice, it is literally sitting in the in your heart. And so if you were to get an infection, it might be possible that we can treat it, but it's not ideal. We're really worried about location here. We don't want you to get an infection. We're going to do everything we can to teach you how to not get an infection, but it's just preferred that you get a fistula or a graft if you are a candidate for those. Now, the really nice thing about the catheter is that it can be used the same day or the very next day. So even though we don't love catheters for long-term use, it is nice that we can give dialysis to people who need it immediately. All right, and as I mentioned earlier, home dialysis is a family decision. Family members can be a source of strength and comfort, and they can help people cope with emotional challenges of illness. Your family wants to see you thrive, but my recommendation with this is do what you can for yourself, whether that's setting up the machine, maybe doing your own needle sticks, maybe ordering your supplies, whatever you are physically capable of. I encourage you to do that to help your family. And home dialysis improves the quality and care of safety for people on dialysis. The in-center staff are wonderful and excellent, and they do amazing work, but nobody's going to care for you better than you and your family. And so home dialysis is a great option. All right, and the last thing I want to touch on before I pass it over to our patient advocate is I want to talk about the 5-year survival. So for people who do in-center dialysis 3 times a week, the average their chances of survival is 40%, whereas people on peritoneal dialysis, their increased chance of survival goes up to 50%. People who do at least 5 days a week of home hemodialysis is 58%. And of course, people with a deceased donor transplant is 75%. So home dialysis is a really great option for people who are waiting for a transplant, or maybe that's just not the right stage of life you're in. And so let's keep you ready for transplant and keep you heart healthy in the meantime. And then I don't know, are there any questions yet in the chat, Amanda, or we can let Antonio speak first?
Yeah, let's let Antonio speak first, and then we'll address all the questions.
Awesome. All right. So Antonio's our patient advocate. I will let him introduce himself. Thanks so much, Antonio, for joining us today.
No problem. So my name is Antonio Green, and I'm a 3.5-year transplanted kidney patient. I consider myself still a kidney dialysis patient because, you know, we're a family and it never stops. So 3.5 years ago, I actually made a commitment to my donor family who gave me a kidney that I would dedicate my life to helping to support kidney patients and educating about kidney dialysis in any possible way that I can, because I felt so privileged that they would decide to give me a kidney, you know, while they were dealing with their loved one, so to speak. So for me, you know, I was on dialysis for a total of 8 years, 7.5 years, and I began my therapy with peritoneal dialysis. And all of my dialysis modalities or types of dialysis choices were made around my lifestyle. So I began while I was living and working in Dubai. And in Dubai, they don't have a system as organized as we do here in the United States. My only 2 choices were peritoneal dialysis and doing dialysis in the hospital. At that time, I was an executive for the airline and I traveled globally on a weekly basis. So peritoneal dialysis was ideal for me. It worked fine for me for about 3 years. And of course, you know, there are the risk of getting an infection and things of that nature. But again, you know, as a patient, peritoneal dialysis was the best choice for me. And it worked with my lifestyle. And, you know, my wife and my daughter was 2 at the time. But they were great help to me, and it maintained me to do what I needed to do and have what I felt like was a normal lifestyle. So my decision was just simply based on, you know, how do I do dialysis and still maintain a lifestyle where I can continue working and providing for my family and feeling good essentially, because I didn't think those options were available for me if I chose to go in the hospital. Just a lot more time, a lot more activity, and what I experienced is that I didn't feel as well dialyzing in the hospital opposed to being on peritoneal. So after peritoneal dialysis, I returned to the States, and I had peritonitis, and it's not the end of the world. We identify it early. We know what caused it, and we get it treated. So I went to the hospital, had my treatment, and at that time I was so committed still to being home. I was committed to being home. I knew I had too much scar tissue, but being the smart patient that I was and am, I had 2 more catheters placed because I was just that used to having freedom in my lifestyle. I felt okay, so I'm going back to what I know, even though they didn't work. But fortunate, working with the doctors in the hospital, the nephrologists, I said there has to be a better way to keep me home. I did not want to go in the clinic because I had no concept of clinics. And when I was told that I had to go to the clinic at 5 a.m. in the morning, and I'm saying that's not happening. And for the lack of a better term, I felt like I was, going to school or, being trapped in this place for these 4 hours. And it's like, I can't do anything. I don't watch TV. It just didn't fit my lifestyle. I mean, it really just didn't. So the nephrologist was sharing with me that HHD was available. I said, sign me up if I get to go home. I'm not worried about sticking myself, even though I was terrified. But for me, it was the fact that I get to continue being home. So it worked out that I had to go into the clinic for about 8-9 months to wait for my training spot. Unfortunately for me, I didn't feel my best in center. It wasn't the staff or anything like that. I just didn't want to be there. I had something and so much else to do other than to sit and watch TV and see other people come in on hospital beds. And, it really made me feel sick. And my experience was in the span of 9 months, my chair neighbors on the right and left of me both passed away within 30 days. So I'm reeling. I'm not feeling well. I have no energy. I'm sleeping 13 hours a day. And I believe this will resonate with a lot of patients. I'm afraid to go to sleep because I'm afraid I won't wake up, but I'm so tired, right? I'm so tired that I'm so weak, shall I say. All I can do is sleep. And, that causes depression in itself. And I'm battling with high phosphorus. And, I'm trying to listen to the dietitian, but, I cut out French fries, cut out potatoes, everything else. Phosphorus is still high. I'm still feeling bad. I got weak. Now I'm walking with a cane. I had to ride in a bug, and I'm dealing with all of these personal things within myself, because what's really on my mind is, how am I going to take care of my family? How am I going to play with my little girl? I mean, all of this is over for me, and this cannot be life for me. I refuse to deal with. So I became grumpy. I became, what some of you as patients have probably dealt with before as a non-compliant patient. Not that I was non-compliant with my therapy, but I just got tired of people talking to me and not, talking at me and not to me. And that was essentially with phosphorus. Dietitian comes around and tells me I need to eat this. And it's like, we tried this already, right? Okay, well, eat frozen grapes. And I'm like, do I look like I eat frozen grapes to you? Right? I'm just grumpy because I don't feel well, right? And I only had one person that I let stick me because I had other episodes with sticking my access, and I didn't want my arm to look ugly and all of these things, right? So they just thought I was grumpy. I was, because I didn't want to be there, right? And I'm feeling worse. So for me, I saw the light at the end of the tunnel when finally my HHD training nurse began to contact the clinic and say, let Mr. Green know that, he's got this many patients ahead of him and he should start cannulating himself. And I was like, probably some of you patients, that was like, not happening. It's just not happening. But thank God I had a care team that really was patient with me. That one PCT that I would only allow to stick me, she encouraged me and said, Mr. Green, remember, you have to learn to stick yourself to go home. That's all she had to say to me was, go home, right? Because I would tell the doctor every month, just let me go home. I'll feel much better, right? So she treated me really like a very patiently, like a baby is what I like to say. She said, here's what we're going to do. She says, I'm going to place your hand on top of my hand while I cannulate you for several weeks. And then we're going to switch. Okay. Okay. You make it look a lot easier, but it worked just perfectly. And what she called graduation day was when I cannulated myself the first time, she placed her hand on top of my hand and I dropped my head and I closed my eyes after I aligned my needle up to my access because I felt like if I watch it, it's going to hurt. But once I cannulated myself and, the clinic and they celebrated for me and I was over the moon, you couldn't tell me anything now. It's like I'm the greatest patient in the world. I can stick myself. And she said, one thing, Mr. Green. I said, what's that? She said, you got to open your eyes when you cannulate yourself. So I said, no problem. It didn't hurt now, right? It's mind over matter. So, and I was successful in my second week into HHD training. Phosphorus dropped from whatever average for me was like 5.5, 5.8, just average. I did the Sensipar game and everything, right? So it dropped to 4.5. Second week in the training, 4.5. Now I'm not feeling tired anymore. Now, another few weeks, I get rid of the cane, right? I'm feeling better. I'm not sleeping so much, right? So much so that one day I was sitting in my backyard like I normally did and just kind of like look at the birds and look at the leaves blow on the tree. I felt so good that I said, I'm going to cut the grass. I told my neighbor, I'm going to cut the grass. Got up, went and cut the grass, and my wife stopped me and she said, my neighbor, don't let him cut the grass. Because there was an incident before that where I tried to do that and bang, I hit the ground. And anyway, forget that story, right? I'm feeling better now. I'm on dialysis. I'm at home. I'm feeling better, right? And she called the doctor, and the doctor was like, well, Antonio, that's the whole point to the therapy. You feel great, and good luck with your wife. And that was the conversation, right? And I went on to cut the grass and just felt empowered, and they were happy to see me feeling so much better. My daughter, when I was home, it was like, okay, Daddy, you're going to do dialysis? And she's about 5 at this point, 5 or 6. And she would jump in my lap she would hold the tape and put on her mask like she did with PD. And she just became everything that I ever needed. And I never recognized the fact that all she wanted was Daddy. Daddy used to just think I would travel, bring her some gifts back, bring her new clothes, whatever. And that meant nothing to her. It meant everything to her that Daddy's home. He's sitting in his chair and he's got time for me. Little did she know, I did my treatment at 7 p.m. because Judge Judy came on at 7. So at the time, Judge Judy came on from 7 to 7:30, then 7:30 to 8. And then by the time I go into my 8 o'clock show, I'm done. I'm pretty much done and I'm ready for bed. And that's the way I wrapped it around my lifestyle. And it worked beautifully for me. And as I wrap this up, while I was in center, there were 2 opportunities for me to get a kidney, and I missed both of them. First time because I had high phosphorus so much, I had calcification on my shoulder bone. So I had just came from surgery that day, rotator cuff surgery, and they called me that night. Couldn't get the kidney. Second time, I was so weak, and the fact that the kidney was bad, I couldn't get it. But lo and behold, I'm home for 3 years on HHD. I get a phone call from Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville, Florida. They pick up my kidney, and this is my evaluations in March. My transplant surgery is August. 6 months. I'm feeling so good. Labs are looking good. I'm feeling great. I'm strong, ready to undergo the surgery. Flew us down to Jacksonville, got a new kidney, and I've been thriving ever since. So I'm always grateful for, the kidney community, the National Kidney Fund, and Foundation rather. And, I wouldn't be here talking. I truly wouldn't be here talking to you if it wasn't for the complete diaspora of dialysis and kidney health and education. and research. So that's great for me. And one last point, I never knew why my kidney failed until I got to Jacksonville, Florida. And I learned that I'm not diabetic, and I wasn't one of those high blood pressure type patients. And I learned that I had been misdiagnosed for lupus all of those years. I was over 50 years old when I learned that I was misdiagnosed for lupus. That's why my kidneys failed. And so I say that to encourage, all of the patients who are on dialysis, get to know why. Get to know why and understand this. And I just want to encourage each and every one of you that, dialysis is not a death sentence. There's so much technology advancing every day. There's so much legislation being made and passed for donors and as well as recipients, so don't give up the fight. Research, ask questions, do whatever you can to make sure that, you're living life on your terms and you can live a good, healthy life. I'm a witness while you're on dialysis. So be well.
Thank you, Antonio, for sharing all of that beautiful story. Absolutely. It was so interesting. We very much appreciate it. Firsthand experience is always very valuable.
Indeed.
Okay, so, Mike, did you want to say something?
Yes. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. First of all, thank you, Chelsea, for your overview of home dialysis. Very informative, and we really appreciate you doing that for us today. And then Antonio, I had to pop on camera. I had to make some comments because you just made my day. You're very inspirational. You love life, and
yes.
Your presentation, the way you spoke about your experience and how this has improved your quality of life, that was huge. It hit me right here. I feel really good about your experience, and I know more and more people that watch our educational webinars that have the opportunity to hear from people like Chelsea and get the opportunity that you had. Their quality of life is going to dramatically improve, and their friends and family will be appreciative. But I can just see it in your smile and your sincere communication to us today that this has really made a difference. Home dialysis totally changed your life, just like having failed kidneys totally changes your life. You had an opportunity, thanks to home dialysis, to improve your quality of life and basically live life as fully as you can. So I wanted to share that. Just really excited. I'm grateful that you were able to join us in this webinar, and thank you.
My pleasure.
Okay, so with that, we do have a couple of questions here. Antonio and Chelsea, both of you can answer all of the questions just based on your different perspectives. So the first one I have here is, if someone is considering home dialysis and they're looking at how it might fit into their home, what are some considerations for how they set up their physical space to accommodate this?
Antonio, do you have any tips for that?
Sure, absolutely. And I think just being honest with respect to peritoneal dialysis, there's a lot more supplies because there are pre-mixed bags and things of that nature. And for me, if you have more space, you can accommodate that. But if you're, in a one-bedroom apartment, things may be a little difficult. I mean, and that's just something to consider with respect to the therapy. On the other hand, with home hemodialysis, essentially what I did personally was I removed my nightstand and I replaced both the PureFlow, which is the water room at home, and the cycler next to my bed, right? And you get a few boxes. So you're talking maybe 20 boxes for peritoneal dialysis versus around 8 boxes a month because you're only dealing with cartridges and you're dealing with non-fluid bags. The PureFlow makes the fluid for you, it drains it. So things become so much easier, as well as with home hemodialysis, everything works with an iPad. So you're not alone, as Chelsea was sharing with peritoneal dialysis. you have 24-hour support. You have 24-hour access to your nurse who's on call. So all of that is very easy for you. And we use technology really well, right? With the iPad, it explains to you how to clear the error or whatever the case may be. You'll go through that with training, as well as the fact that you can call someone live and take care of things. And if you're thinking about, with respect, and I'm just going off a little bit here, but if you're thinking about that in center, right, the machine alarms a lot. That's not the case at home. So you don't need a technician to come and run and do things, because the first thing the HHD cycler does is the pump shuts off immediately so you can't hurt yourself. And that's a great thing for you. So you don't have to worry about if you're having blood episodes and things of that nature at home. But with respect to supplies, what I did was, after I placed the equipment, I purchased a 3-tier kitchen rack, and I just opened up the boxes and everything fit perfectly on the 3-tier rack, and I was rocking and rolling. And you have the option also on both therapies with respect to, instead of getting a month supply, you can get 2-week supply. So that, whatever that helps accommodate your space, you have those options available to you.
Yeah, excellent. The nurses are very much willing to do like a preemptive home visit as well. So even if you're curious about doing home dialysis, but you're not sure how it's going to fit into your space, the nurses are willing to come out and do that home visit, and they get really creative. We had someone one time, we're like, where'd all your boxes go? And they lifted up a tablecloth and they made a coffee table out of their boxes, because you're not going to need all the supplies all the time. So we can get really, really creative. So don't let space concerns be a constraint for you, because we can help you figure that out.
Absolutely.
And I did drop into the chat. I don't know if other people will be able to see the chat, but I did drop what a typical month of supplies of home hemo supplies look like, and what a typical month of PD supplies look like. But like Antonio mentioned, we could talk about more frequent deliveries if this was a barrier or a concern to you as well.
Perfect. Okay. All right, so the next question that I have here is, what happens in a power outage, or if there's a crisis situation? What does crisis planning look like?
Yeah, so we do crisis planning at least quarterly. We're going to have those conversations. We're going to ask that you are able to teach back to us what you're going to do. Peritoneal dialysis, because there is the ambulatory dialysis like we talked about, that one does not require electricity. It's all gravity with the IV pulse. So even if you were to use the cycler most of the time, you might temporarily be able to switch to the ambulatory type of peritoneal dialysis to complete those treatments. Now, thankfully in Wisconsin, we don't have to worry too often about natural disasters, but great question. And then for home hemodialysis, because you're only treating 4 to 5 days a week, all right, it didn't work out today, we're just going to dialyze tomorrow instead. Anything you would add to that, Antonio?
Yeah, I would just add the fact that you have enough power on HHD, so you can rinse back, and you can always rinse back manually. And you can also work with your doctor, your care team, who will write a letter to the local utility companies to say, you have a life-saving device at home, and if there's a disaster, you should be the first one to turn it back on. So, as well as going to do your treatments if it's long-term in the clinic. So that's all I would add.
All right, that makes sense. Okay, so moving on to the next question here. What are considerations or questions that patients should bring into a conversation when they're talking about travel with their care team? Like, is there anything that they really should think about how they're going to plan for it, I guess, over time?
Yeah, from a patient's perspective, I think it's all about the patient, right? It depends on, if you go on vacation and you want to enjoy it. And this is just my personal patient perspective, right? If you're traveling and you're in center, if they're able to find you a transient chair, It could be hours from where you're actually vacationing, and it might not be at the most optimal times for you. With respect to, home hemodialysis, for example, if, I treat it 4 days a week, and if I wanted to take a 5-day trip, essentially I just treat the day I left and the day I returned, and that's my 3 days off, and I didn't have to take anything with me. Long term, you can take the cycler with you, and we can send you pre-mixed bags. But that way, the benefit is you don't have to leave where you're vacationing, and it doesn't have to be interrupted. So it's about what you want to enjoy and fitting it around your lifestyle.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. For travel, the more notice, the better. But again, we want to be patient centric. And so sometimes we're not going to be able to plan ahead. And that's the beauty of home dialysis. There's a lot of flexibility there. Maybe not so much with ordering supplies. Usually we do need a little bit of leeway if you want us to ship your supplies. But if you're driving and you can take those by car, you may not be dependent on us having to set that up for you. We also have a huge network of other clinics that sometimes we can, kind of work a last minute situation. Maybe you forgot something. And so we're able to contact somebody and say, hey, they forgot their caps. Could you just spare us some? And usually people are pretty gracious about that. And then my last tip is to encourage people to start small. Maybe, being in Wisconsin, maybe try a week in Door County versus going to like Las Vegas, just so you can see, because travel is already stressful for people who aren't doing any healthcare, procedures. And so start small, because there are going to be a bump in the road. And so give yourself that grace that if you needed to drive home, you could, but we do want you to travel. Absolutely.
And along with, just to piggyback on Chelsea, one other thing you want to also consider when you're vacationing, if you are on peritoneal dialysis, and swimming in fresh water versus spring water and chlorinated pools and things of that nature, where with home hemodialysis, it's not an issue. You just dive in, right? So just keeping that in mind as well.
Antonio, as we're talking about travel, would you touch on maybe showering at hotels with a PD catheter? Did you have to do anything special for that?
Yes, I should do commercials for Tarragon, because I would buy it by the boxes, right? And I just put the covers on, just to be careful, because it's very sensitive and you have to be very mindful. Also, not just showering, but in the hotel room, you have to control the heat. You have to control just the airflow, right? And I don't speak every language, but sometimes it's hard for me to call the front desk 10 times and say, I still hear the fan on, right? So you have to think about all of those things. Going through the airport, anything airborne is, I got peritonitis coming home, 15-hour flight, forgot to ask the captain to turn off the pressurized air, and I'm in first class, right? Did an exchange, and I spent the last 10 hours balled up in a knot.
Ouch.
So, I mean, that's just the reality of it. And, and I'm not trying to scare patients, but more of just educating them that it's around your lifestyle. But with peritoneal dialysis, you have to be very careful, because with that abdomen catheter, once you take that cap off, your entire insides is wide open. Where, I'm not advocating for one or the other. Dialysis is dialysis. And by far, the numbers show home dialysis is a much better option for dialysis patients, right? But you want to consider with home hemodialysis and just your normal access, and I still have my access and I'll never get rid of it. But you have a lot more freedom without having to worry about things that are airborne.
Okay. This question is kind of directed towards Chelsea, just to expand on a little bit. So if a dialysis patient is planning a trip, when should they start bringing up, hey, I'm planning on this trip? What's a good time frame for that?
So to me, the sooner the better. You know, if you know you're going to go somewhere, it doesn't hurt to tell your care team you're planning to go somewhere. Now, it doesn't mean that the care team is going to act on that information right away, especially the type of dialysis you're going to do. Now, if it is a home dialysis, we can put that supply order in immediately, as long as you have an address of where we can ship those supplies. If you wanted to treat in-center temporarily, usually we can put that request in, but the request won't necessarily be acknowledged until closer to the date of travel, just because those clinics don't know what their scheduling is going to look like until usually about a week or two before. But it's always best that we get that request in sooner. And I don't know, Antonio, if you could speak to that, but especially when you're doing home hemodialysis, sometimes we'll try to set up an in-center. But like Antonio said, it's not always super convenient, especially when you dialyze at home and you're used to doing things on your schedule and your terms, and you're used to feeling good. And now you're going to go do an in-center treatment and maybe not feel as good. And now you're missing the vacation because they give you the time when everybody's out doing excursions. And so sometimes I would set up an in-center dialysis treatment for people, and they wouldn't like the time that was available to them. And so they'd say, you know what, I'm going to change my mind and I'm going to take my cycler with me, and you ship the supplies, and we can do that.
Yes, absolutely. I've never thought about, while I've traveled on HHD, I've never thought about in-center as an option. It's get the travel case, and half case will travel.
Corey, would you have anything to add to that? Because I know you deal with the travel side probably more than we do.
Yeah, so typically we ask for 4 weeks notice. That's pretty typical. If you're going to Hawaii, Alaska, we ask for 6 weeks notice on those, just because logistically those are a little bit more difficult. But anywhere in the continental US, 4 weeks notice is plenty of time.
Okay, perfect. That makes sense. All right, and then the last question that I have here is, what supports are available that you guys recommend for managing the emotional impact of dialysis in general? We know this can be a really heavy topic and difficult to navigate. What type of supports would you recommend?
I'd recommend that there are a lot of, including NKF, there are a lot of social media community groups out there. Some run by organizations, some run by patients, who, you can get there, and we all talk about just normal things that happen. And I'm encouraged because we get this support. We get to support one another, and we become a family and community. And I was cheering on. He calls himself Dialysis Daddy. He's having the gastric sleeve tomorrow, and then he's going to be ready for transplant. So I was just cheering him on, and I think he lives in Canada. Right? I mean, so we just become family. So I would encourage to go on this, social media groups, and actually, again, and go to the NKF website. There are many advocates. There are many, education classes like this one being recorded, as well as other links to community groups to help out.
Yeah. And I think I was really surprised. So I initially started as an in-center social worker before I worked in a home program. And I was really, really surprised at how engaged the home patients were with each other, because I think a lot of people are fearful to go from in-center to home dialysis because they're afraid of losing that support system. You do make friends with people in the lobby, both in-center, but also at home. And your nurses and your social worker, the dietitian, they really do become like family in a lot of ways. We want to hear from you. I sometimes would tell my staff, like, oh my gosh, these people go home because they don't want to hear from you. And Antonio, you tell me if you think differently, but they really do try to be supportive. But I agree with Antonio. There's a lot of support in a different variety of ways.
Absolutely. And when I talk to patients, I share my social media links and everything else, LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever, all of them, just to say, hey, reach out. It's all about just partnering and everything else. So, I think just, a real quick Google search will take care of that.
Yeah. And most dialysis companies do have more formal support groups. So if that is something somebody is interested in, we can definitely get them set up. We are definitely always looking at care partners and family members because we know, again, dialysis, home dialysis especially, is a family decision. And so we want to provide that support to the care partners as well.
Yeah, and I'm not sure, Chelsea, if you remember when we did this a while back, that patients who chose to go home on HHD, there was a kind of a mentoring kind of setup we had where patients, or like me, we would call the newly trained person once they're home and check on them and see how they're doing and exchange information. So we have all of that available for our patients to feel comfortable at home.
Absolutely. Yep.
Perfect. Well, that was a wonderful presentation. That's all the questions that I have today. So yeah, I think we can wrap up. Thank you, Antonio Green and Chelsea Mueller, for giving us this wonderful presentation on home dialysis. If you have any follow-up questions, you can reach out to us here at the Kidney Foundation of Wisconsin at kidneywi.org. But other than that, thank you and take care.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
wonderful night.